Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk about the Compiler Academy. So first of all, a couple of words about me. So I joined EPFL as a compiler engineer for the LAMP, the lab where Scala was originated in 2019. Currently, since after working there for 2 years, I switched to the Scala Center, and now currently I'm working more with community projects than with technical projects. So yeah, my focus currently is to develop the projects that help the community collaborate more effectively together and achieve common goals more effectively together. So in this talk, I would like to speak about the project that I've been working on for the past 2 years, which is the Compiler Academy. So I would like to cover the topics like what is the Compiler Academy, why it originated. Then in those 2 years' time, the Compiler Academy took quite a journey. So I would like to separate some distinctive periods in its history and cover what they were motivated with and how they went. And finally, I would like to cover the point of this talk, which is the technology of making such a project possible. How do you build a project that brings your community together for your own company or for your own open source project, or how do you build such a community in general? So let's start with covering the basics, like what is the Compiler Academy? What is this concept? So it is pair programming. It happens online in Zoom breakout rooms, the format. It is oriented on fixing the compiler issues. The objective is to build the community around the compiler, which is, by the community around the compiler, I mean that there are some people that are working on the compiler anyway, but they not necessarily get in touch with each other too frequently. They not necessarily have an opportunity to get in touch with each other because they may be in different teams, they may be in different geographical locations. There are contributors from the outside of EPFL, for example, of the core teams. The core teams is EPFL Scala Center, LAMP, Lightband, and Virtus Lab. So if people are outside those teams, they are generally outside our internal communication channels, so that might also be the problem. And finally, this Compiler Academy is run and supported by the core Scala 3 teams that I just named. So the journey separates 3 distinctive periods. So the inception was in summer of 2021. Then in 2022, I call it the period of scaling. It was like a period more of experimentation, I should say. It's less scaling, more experimentation. One aspect of which was trying to scale it. And finally, in 2023, it is stabilization and expansion. So expansion as in 2 different other projects than the compiler. So let's see how it went. So the first period, period in the history of the Compiler Academy was its inception. It happened in summer 2021. And what is summer 2021? So if you remember, it was the COVID lockdown. We couldn't work from our offices, so it was remote work. And it was challenging because of those reasons, it was challenging to stay in touch with the team. So many people, they struggled switching to the offices and adapting to this new lifestyle. So that was one trend. Another trend was that Scala 3 was recently released. So in May of 2021, Scala 3 was released. What does that mean? So Scala 3 was released after a long 8 years of experimentation and work on the Dotty compiler. That was a precursor to the Scala 3 before it went official. So during those 8 years of experimentation, we had one set of target audiences, which is people who are not averse to risk, people who are not averse to experimentation and playing with the features that may not be stable. But we didn't have people who, well, rely on stability, who want stability and who want guarantees. Once you release a stable version of the software, those other stakeholders start to come and start to also use your software. So you get more usage, so you get more bugs. And this means greater issue burden on the maintenance team. So the maintenance team at that time was LAMP, which is a lab at EPFL. And lab is the scientific unit, so it is tasked with research first and maintenance second. So that is a problem that they started to gain more maintenance burden at the time. Based on those factors that I listed, we started to think about what can be done about that. And one of the avenues that we decided to try was the avenue of the Compiler Academy. So we decided to do the pair programming sprees to bring the people from our teams together to make it feel more connected with teammates during this lockdown period, but also to foster the knowledge sharing and help work on the issues to reduce the issue count. The reason we went with the idea of the sprees is because the Scala Center, which is another unit at EPFL that works on Scala 3 and Scala in general. Scala Center, it was practicing the internal sprees for quite a while at that point, and that was a working model that allowed the employees of the Scala Center to get together once per week and see what other people are working on and potentially help each other. So we thought that it made sense to also try that format with the compiler. The initial objective was mostly for the knowledge transfer, because at our core teams, in general, we have a situation where different people work on different areas of the compiler. So we need to, if you bring them together and allow them to work together on different issues, it means that people get to communicate while working on certain issues that one person may be more familiar with, one person may be less familiar with, and this means knowledge transfer. At first, we decided to do it internal only, so it means for the people from Lightband, Scala Center, Virtus Lab, and LAMP. And that is because we were not confident in the format, we were not confident at how it will go. It was a highly uncertain environment, as I already mentioned. So we wanted to polish it internally before opening it up to more people. And of course, given the situation, we had to do it in the virtual format, not only because of the COVID, but also because different members of the core teams are located in different areas. Scala Center and LAMP are at EPFL, and Virtus Lab is in Poland. Lightband is distributed, so that had to be taken into account. Shaping it, how do you shape such kind of event? So how do you come up with the correct format? So in principle, it sounds simple if you think about it. It's just bringing people together in one room on Zoom at a certain time and hacking on some issues. But in practice, it's not so, because there are 4 teams to coordinate, and we need to figure out things like what is the most convenient time for everyone, what is the least burdensome process that we can employ, and so on. So how did we shape that? Well, it was an iterative process. We didn't assume that we know everything about how to make those events when we started. So it was take the existing model of the Scala Center and just go with it while constantly collecting feedback. So after every spree, we had 3 questions asked of our participants. First, what went right? Second, what went wrong? And third, of course, the status. What did you do? How did it went? Initially, around 10 people were showing up at those sprees every time. So the frequency was 1 time per 3 weeks for 2 hours. At first it was for 1 hour, then we evolved to 2 hours. Around 10 people were showing up from the core teams initially. and that yielded around 4 issues being fixed per spree, so around 4 issues per month output. Overall, it took us 7 iterations or 5 months to stabilize the format. What do I mean by that is, well, as I mentioned before, we ask people at the end of each spree what went right and what went wrong, and it means that during those 7 first iterations, we were constantly getting some feedback. This didn't work, this needs to be improved, and so on. And after those 7 iterations, we stopped getting those feedback. So people were generally saying, yeah, okay, it's fine. So what were those points of feedback that we had to generally polish? Well, one takeaway was that it's very important to figure out the right software for online conferencing, because at the time of COVID, we had a lot of new conferencing software sprouting up. So there were those virtual conferencing software where you had like a virtual space, like a little game where you could move your avatars on the screen, and if you move them to other people's avatars, then they can hear you. So we tried that. That didn't work too well, because when you share the screen, it eats up CPU, and it's impossible to compile the code, so people were complaining. We tried using VS Code sharing, because it's like Google Docs, it's collaborative code editing. That didn't work too well either, because some people don't have VS Code, and you need also browser, you need also the terminal. You cannot do that from VS Code sharing. So we settled on Zoom at the end, the conservative solution that works. So that's one thing that we tried to figure out. And second, of course, is the format. So one notable thing is the format of 1 hour initially. It didn't work because 1 hour spree, you cannot get started on the issue. You just get started, you get warmed up, you want to continue, you still feel like you can continue, but there is no time to do that. So we had to change that to 2 hours. And one general takeaway is the simpler the better, because as long as you get multiple moving pieces, such as, for example, one conferencing software to share the screen, another conferencing software to communicate via voice, it gets quickly very messy. So if you can use one channel, one medium to do your communication, your coordination, that would be better. After those 7 iterations, we felt like we are confident enough to start opening it up more to people from the community, because we are not only the 4 core teams working on the compiler, we also have people from the community who actively contribute. So we wanted to include them as well. So how did that go? Well, how do you find those people? Well, we sent out the call on Twitter for people to join. At that point, we had to think about the coordination channel, because while it was among our 4 core teams, we could just send out the calendar invite informally to the people involved, and they come to the Zoom link you specified. But here you had external people, so you need some kind of coordination. So we had to make a dedicated Slack channel for that. That was also the period of time where we had problems with the time zones, because we had an increased demand from the American time zones. We were doing it in the time comfortable for the European time zones. And we had to move the spree outside the working hours of the European time zone to facilitate the people from the American time zones. That unfortunately led to some people from our time zones, from the European time zones, being unable to join as much, but overall I think this move was good, because we could accommodate the larger pool of people. And also at that point of time we introduced the onboarding call, because when you work with the community, you need to know your people you work with. You need to work on the environment to be good, to be well moderated, to disallow bad actors, to foster good actors. For that you need some kind of screening procedure when you invite the new people. So in practice, just having a form where people enter their details and you schedule a call with them, you speak for half an hour, you see person's background. It's helpful to see where people are coming from, not only from the moderation perspective, but also for the feedback collection perspective, because different people, they have different intent when coming to the project. So some people, they're just curious about how it works internally. Some people, they have some concrete objectives, like metals doesn't work, we need to fix it. Like I want to do a plugin, I want to work on that area. So that's helpful to know who is working on what, because you can later connect the people together so that they can collaborate. The biggest challenge here was probably the team balancing. So what does that mean? Well, it's pair programming, right? So we need to split people into teams. Teams are usually 2 to 5 people. But the challenge when we allow people from the outside is that some people are more experienced, some people are less experienced. And we want people to have good experience with the program, so we do not want them to just put them in the room and with other new people like them and not knowing how to even compile the compiler. Another thing is that some people, they do not have a preference what to work on. Some people are more focused and they know what they want, so that also needs to be taken into account. So the point is there are many different people with different backgrounds and different preferences, and all of it needs to be taken into account. So this means we need to modify the procedure of how to know who wants to work on what and who is going to come to the spree. Well, we started with the simplest solution, which is a Google form where people specify whether or not they come to the next spree and the issues they want to work on. The added challenge is that to take into account that some people don't have much experience, we have a constraint that at least one experienced person must be per room to provide guidance to people. And this didn't work that well, because it took like 3 hours each spree to balance the teams, just to balance the teams. And why is that? Well, because when people register, they generally they specify very different issues. So generally you do not get 2 people specifying one issue. Unless they conspired before, unless they worked before on this issue, that doesn't happen. So it means that you need to move people around. It means that you need to take one person and say, no, sorry, you're not going to work on this issue. Is it fine if you work on that issue? So you need to ping people around, and that's like 10 people to ping. You need to wait for replies. Some people have some preferences about that, so it takes a lot of time. And we fixed that by adding just one simple flag to the registration form. We brought down the time for team balancing from 3 hours to 20 minutes. The flag was a consent of the person to be moved to a different team, and it was on by default. So by default, people are consenting to be moved because it's less work to change the information. It's more work, sorry, if you need to change this flag. So if you collect the people's consent to do all the administrative moves that you need, it really helps in this kind of pipelines, because it eliminates the need to communicate with people that much more. You streamline the process more. So that was 2021. We were by the end of 2021, we had the format figured out. The format was solid, and nothing else was happening. People were loving it. People were showing up every time. There were around 20 people, from 10 to 20 people showing up, and they reported that they loved it. They loved hacking together. So we saw the continuous demand on this to be continued. So for 2022, we had to come up with some more deliberate strategy of what to do with it. Because 2021, it was just an experiment, just to see whether it flies or not, whether it helps or not. It was less formal. But in 2022, we saw that there is a potential, so we could plan ahead. So for that year, for the previous year, what we did boiled down to 2 experiments. The experiment of scaling the spree in terms of amount of people who come, and in terms of producing educational content for other people to learn new stuff, to learn the compiler. So first of all, the scaling challenge. So what did that mean? So where were we at the time when we started it? We were at the position of around 20 people per spree coming regularly, around 4 issues per spree being tackled, being fixed. So we put an objective that we made an assumption that if we attract more people, we would be able to fix more issues, and we would be able to grow more contributors that would be able to become full-time contributors for the project. Well, unfortunately, those assumptions were not confirmed in the course of this experiment. We designed the entire pipeline, like the entire journey of people from coming to the spree to becoming a mentor. But as we look down into it, it all boiled down to mentors. If you have mentors, that is people who are experienced in this scene, you can scale it. If you do not have mentors, you cannot scale it. And as it turned out, the problem of mentors is quite significant because there are not that many people in the world who know the compiler, know the Scala compiler, and who have the time to work actually on it. So basically it is everyone else who graduated from EPFL, from LAMP, from Scala Center. They have this expertise, but they most frequently are already busy working full-time jobs, and that is a bottleneck. Another bottleneck is that the assumption of scaling people, scaling the issue output is not correct, because in practice that's not how it works, because most of the issues, like not most of them, but a significant chunk of them are discussions. It means that they're not straightforward. And by not straightforward, I mean that sometimes it's not even clear like how from the theoretical perspective it will work. Like if it is something in the type system, we do not have the type theory covering the entirety of Scala, how it works. So there will be debates of how type inference should work, and there are a lot of issues that have to do with this type inference. So it's not possible for people to just pick this issue, come to the spree and figure it out. So core teams, LAMP specifically, they need to sit down and figure out what would be the solution for this particular type inference issue. So at that point also coming with those assumptions, we started to make moves to make those, to test those assumptions. So we opened up the spree for the official Scala channels. So if previously we were only attracting the new people from Twitter, and now we saw that that we have the official channels on Discord, so we probably should have the presence on Discord as a spree if we want to open it up to more people. So we did that. The next initiative that we tried was the YouTube channel, and it ties down directly into the previous arguments that I meant about the bottlenecks. Specifically about the bottleneck of mentorship time. So it's scarce. We do not have the ability to attract mentors to every spree, or to attract a lot of mentors to every spree. So we thought to try a different approach. When we thought that this doesn't work, we thought to catch those mentors and ask them to give a talk about the internals of the compiler, about their area of expertise. So the concept is, have the author of an area of the compiler give a talk on that area. So for example, a person who authored metaprogramming, Nicolas Tuki, he gave a 2-hour-long talk about how it works inside the compiler, which is like a complete walkthrough of everything, of how it gets initiated, how it works inside the compiler, and so on. So we made this channel a year ago. The concept, as I mentioned, was core team records videos about the compiler, and it worked fairly well. So here are some stats after 1 year. It's not that impressive for a YouTube channel, but for the niche YouTube channel that focuses specifically on the Scala compiler, I think those stats are pretty significant. So we have 500 plus subscribers. We have 330 hours of total watch time on 14 videos in total released in the period of 1 year. So next challenge that we were encountering with the challenge of while we were doing the scale and while we were trying to attract more people into the scene, into the project, was how to streamline it more, because with scale comes more things that can go wrong and more responsibility to communicate things properly, more channels that you need to communicate for different stakeholders. So initially, you can see here a screenshot of what I had to manage this spree. And this is a checklist. So it is a checklist that tells you exactly which steps you need to take to make the spree happen on every single day or every single week of the spree. So here, for example, it's titled, this particular entry of this checklist is titled the day after the spree. And there are precise steps that you need to take with all the links that you need to click to do it. So for example, first you need to update take a look at the issue count at the .t repo, the issue count that were designated as appropriate for the spree. And if it is low, you need to do something about that. You need to initiate the new registration, you need to do the announcements on all the channels, and so on. And it is all very closely, very tightly specified what to do, also for the purpose of making sure that I'm not the only admin who can do that, that other people can get onboarded and follow the same checklist and it will work. But of course, it is very tedious to follow those checklists. The cycle of the spree is 3 weeks, and on every of those 3 weeks, you have to go through some checklist, and it takes time. And it is not only time; it is the switch of the context. Like, for example, you're working on something else already, and you still need to do this checklist, and you run into some deadlines on other projects, and you just don't want to do this checklist. So the solution for me was to make this checklist automated, but this cannot be automated in a naive way, as in take a Scala script, for example, and write a program, a Scala program that would contact the APIs of the services that you interact with and do all the communications. I wanted to avoid that because it's code, and code is always liability, because you need to maintain that code. You run into bugs, you run into breakages of APIs, and in practice, it is more time wasted coding this solution than time saved. But fortunately, those two projects, the make.com and Airtable, were a solution for me. So what is that? Well, first of all, an Airtable is spreadsheets essentially that is a hybrid with an SQL database. So basically, spreadsheets with types. Spreadsheets with types are cool because you can have filtering there, you can have strong typing there, so you can validate the information being entered. So this plays well with bots, because bots they frequently do this kind of tasks like filtering and stuff. And the other solution was make.com, which is a visual programming language. So the second screenshot that you see here is a program. It is a workflow, and every node of this workflow is a task, an action that will get executed. So for example, if you see here the Discord logo, this means communication over Discord. This means send a message over Discord. Slack means send a message over Slack. If you see GitHub, it means either send a message over GitHub or contact the GitHub API to figure something out. You see that it also integrates with Airtable. So the benefit of it, like what is the benefit of this over, say, a Python or a Scala script? Well, because it is fast to deploy this, it is fast to make this. It is one evening and you're done. And if it is one evening and you're done with the entire program, or 3 evenings, for example, it means that if it doesn't work, it is just 3 days of time. It is very safe. You don't waste like half a month coding it. So if it breaks, you can potentially rewrite the entire thing from scratch without major problems. And rewriting it from scratch is also important for flexibility, because as we change the format, as we scale, we need to change the format. As we change the format, we change the checklists. And this is what I was frequently doing with this checklist that you see here. I found myself frequently going to it and adding new tasks, removing old tasks, finding more things to optimize. So you have to modify this frequently. If it is a program, it is very tedious to modify because you need to think about architecture. This architecture doesn't support modifications. You need another architecture. You know how it goes. With this thing, you do not need to do that because it's a couple of nodes over the course of several evenings. So that was great. So we automated all of those big checklists with only some of the automation tasks that, some of the tasks that couldn't be automated. So what is the current state of things? How does it work right now? So by 2022, we finished with those experiments, the experiment of scale, the experiment of the learning platform. And for 2023, we started with following state. We have still around 10 people of regular attendance per spree, which are a mixture of the core contributors who are interested in this kind of stuff, and the outsider contributors who are not the members of the core teams, but who are still very passionate about the compiler and who still want to work on this. We figured out that we cannot in good faith make the purpose of the project to the purpose of reducing the issue count, because that's not going to work. You need just far too many mentors to attract to make it feasible. And even if you do that, it's very questionable whether or not those discussion-worthy issues are going to be addressable by this kind of format, because it still boils down to a couple of people that have the expertise to comment on those discussions. Most people, they do not have the precise expertise on those things. So the current purpose is the knowledge transfer between the people who actually work on the compiler. Because coming together to the spree and working on the issues is going to give you some exposure to how other people do this kind of thing. The important move was to make it managed by LAMP, because previously it was organized and managed by the Scala Center, but we discovered that if it is managed by LAMP, you are more in touch with people who can come to the spree and have the knowledge of how to do this spree. So currently we outsourced that to LAMP. LAMP is managing that. Objectives-wise, so what we figured out is we do not have much to do with the current format on the current project anymore in terms of changing the format. It is there, it is stable, people come, and people like it. So what we are currently aiming for is to open source the format, because the format we were developing for 2 years, we were polishing it, and we figured out that other people might find it also useful and would avoid making all those mistakes that we made, and would avoid testing out all these technologies that didn't work or stuff that didn't work. So we want to open source it. So the objective is to help other open source projects who are interested in building their own communities, in speaking to the contributors, in having some kind of contributor event going, having them getting started on those projects. So the open sourcing haven't taken place yet. We just have the plans to do that. Over the past half a year, we were figuring out the format of, like, the roadmap of how to get it open sourced, as well as the move of the spree from Scala Center to LAMP. Yeah, so I expect for this to happen in the second half of 2023, the open sourcing of the spree. I expect it to be in the format of a Git repo with a README page where you have everything outlined, all the processes, all the technologies, all the steps that needs to be taken. And also expect the people who are interested in the open source projects, expect to find some beta testers to test out this format on their projects. So I'll be reaching out to the community to see who is interested in doing that. But I can give you some sneak peek at how it looks like technology-wise right now. What do we have before it is formalized somewhere on GitHub? So first of all, the format. We figured out that the 3-week format works well. So the week -1, the W-1 stands for week -1. It's a week of registrations where people can come and register to the next spree to indicate that they're coming and which issues they are willing to work on. Next, the subsequent week, week -1, is the preparation. So we figured out it's a good idea to give people at least 1 week to prepare for the spree, because if it is like at first what we are doing is not given this week, and some people were complaining like, I want to look at the issue beforehand. So we are having this week of preparation, and finally week 0 is a spree, which takes place over the course of 2 hours, including 15-minute debrief at the end. So debrief is quite important, because if you do not have the closure of the event, it can get tiring, because people do not have a clear idea when to stop working on those issues. It can overrun and people can get tired, and they might not come next time if it is too tiring for them. And it's also good to have this debrief session to collect feedback. Okay, maintenance work. So what do you need to do to make it happen? What is the cost to make it running, to keep it running? So the cost, the main avenues of cost, they boil down to issue selection and team balancing. So this cannot be automated. You need to see who registers to your spree. You need to know your people, who is interested in what, and who might benefit from working with whom, so that to put people together in the right teams. The most general thing that you need to ensure is that there is a mixture of experienced people and mentees, unexperienced new people in every team, because if you put only the unexperienced people in one team, it's not going to be a good experience. And another thing is issue selection. That is actually one of the big complaints that we're getting with the spree, which unfortunately we cannot do much about, because so what people are complaining about is that many issues are rabbit holes, and it's difficult to select them well. Like they're not well selected, but the problem is that it's difficult to select the issues that are straightforward, because mostly they are not straightforward in the compiler. You start in one piece of the compiler and you end up dealing with the entire compiler altogether, because one part of the compiler influences another part of the compiler. I do not expect it to be with every project, but that's just something to keep in mind, that selecting good issues and straightforward issues is a good thing. Well, the other piece of maintenance work is the statistics collection, which is easy to do. It is after the spree is done, you check who submitted what PRs, what issues were closed, so that you have some idea of what's going on, and if your format is working or not. And finally, interviewing new participants is also important. As I mentioned before, this is mostly needed to screen people, to keep your community nice. But also to figure out what people are interested in. So for me, while I was doing that, it took maybe half an hour per interview, and maybe 2-3 interviews per month or so, because not everyone is interested in the compiler. So, I mean, for other projects that might be different, so you need to balance your time accordingly. And finally, the coordination, the reminder messages on various channels. All of this can be automated via make.com. It costs maybe $10 per month. It's not a big cost, given the benefit of having the event like that. So, in general, if you want to start a community, what to look at, what makes or breaks starting such kind of community, well, first and foremost, you need to ensure that there are people who are mentors and who are willing to dedicate the time coming to those events and working with people. You don't have mentors, you don't have a good experience on an open source project. Then you need to figure out the communication channels. This is mostly logistics, this is mostly GitHub, that most projects have anyway, but you also need to have some kind of Slack or Discord, because you need to have some kind of place where people can communicate also after the spree, and you can make the announcements. In general, people need to know where to find those announcements and to find help when they're stuck. And finally, you need some kind of backend. By backend, I mean what you as an admin work with, what software you as an admin work with to get the job done, which is to see who registered to the spree, which is to move people from one team to another to ensure the teams are balanced, and which is to send the reminders to everyone else. So that's your dashboard to manage this thing. it's important to have a good dashboard, because if you don't have it, it's the difference between having like dozens of hours spent on running the spree per month to having like 2 hours, 4 hours, or even less once it's streamlined. I don't know what is the situation right now about the time expenditure, but when I was running it, I spent like 1 hour per month to do that. But currently, maybe it's more because people from labs, they are more meticulous picking those issues and working with people. So that's all I wanted to speak about how it works to run the event. Again, all of this, I'm planning to open source this format by the end of the year, so that people can get started. And I'm planning to look for beta testers of the format. So if you're interested, feel free to also ping me about that. Also, if you're interested in the Compiler Academy itself, monitor the Discord channel for Scala, which is official Scala server. The channel is called Scala Contributors. All the announcements every week are posted there. You will notice them. Feel free to register for those sprees. So thank you very much for listening, and yeah.